This is one of the most hotly anticipated cars in Australia right now. Now, as you can see, it is a little bit rough and ready, but there's a very, very good reason for that. It's because it's a prototype, a development prototype of the all-new LandCruiser 300 series, and I'm here for a very exclusive sneak peek. It's not every day that a new LandCruiser comes along. In fact, it's not even every decade. The last all-new LandCruiser was the 200 series way back in 2007. Now, as you can see, they haven't mucked around with the formula a whole lot. It is still a large off-roader. Clearly designed to do some pretty serious off-roading, as you can see this one has been doing. It's a prototype. It's been put to hell and back. It's all about putting it through extreme customer usage, which is what this car's done. But the deeper you dig, there are some pretty significant changes to this car. For example, under the cladding, under this camouflage that's designed to keep the cameras away, is mainly aluminium panels. So yes, the steel structure of the car remains, but it's now got a lot of aluminium, all about reducing weight. So it's about 200 kilograms lighter than the model it replaces. And under the bonnet, this has been speculated for a long time. The V8 engine has gone in its place, a 3.3 litre twin turbo V6, but it's actually got more grunt than the V8. In terms of dimensions, the 300 series isn't radically different to the 200 it replaces. So inside, similar amount of space. You've still got 3 rows of seats if you want them. If you want, you can also choose a 5-seat version, so have more luggage space in the back and still have that touring ability, take the family away. The general layout is cleaner and more modern looking, starting with a nice big touchscreen across the dash. You've got really clear ventilation controls and a simplicity to it, but at the same time, it's easier to find some of the switches. There are also some more features. So for example, you've still got a centre diff lock, but now a rear diff lock and a front diff lock. So focusing on that off-road ability. Obviously, this particular car isn't entirely representative of what you're going to see in dealerships. It's gone through a lot of punishment, and there's all sorts of sensors. Some of the plastics aren't the right finishes, so it is an early development car, but it gives you a sense of where they're going, and certainly it's a big step up. There's been no messing with the basic layout. It's got a ladder frame chassis, albeit a new one, lighter and stronger than the previous one. You still got independent front suspension, live axle at the back. So fairly familiar for LandCruiser buyers. A lot of that has been done for durability, for reliability, not changing, I guess, the basics, not going too tech heavy on this car, because Toyota realises what it's going to be used for. They understand that people want the thing to go and go and go. But there are absolutely differences with how it drives, and the most obvious one of that is obviously the engine. So this V6, it's hooked up to a 10-speed automatic, 4 more ratios than previously. The engine itself, as I said before, does make more grunt than the V8, so you're looking at 227 kilowatts, a 27 kilowatt jump. You're looking at 700 newton meters, an extra 50 newton meters over the V8. So when you step on it, it does pull really nicely. And one of the big things you notice is that transmission. It's quite closely spaced. So often when you're flat, for example, it'll only drop 600 or 700 revs between one ratio and the next. So it keeps the engine closer to its sweet spot. It's still constant four-wheel drive, and it's still got a low range gear set. So you've still got that serious off-roading ability in there. But it does now have 3 differential locks, so front, center and rear, so you can get that maximum traction. That said, Toyota's done a heck of a lot of work on the electronics, on the calibration of things like stability control and traction control, making sure that the car can feed the power to the wheel that has more traction. There's been an enormous effort put into this car to improve its on-road driving. You're never going to get a car this big and heavy to drive like a sports car. Physics work against you in that regard. But it's certainly a lot better than it was before. The steering, for example, far more progressive through its whole operation. So instead of having that sort of tightness that the 200 series had initially off-centre, this one has a more progressive flow throughout the steering range. It also sits flatter. It's less likely to lean through corners. Sure, it'll still tip over a bit, but it's better controlled. So yes, it's still big and bulky, but it feels less ponderous. It's easier to manoeuvre, particularly on a sealed road. But as with all cars, there are compromises, and some of those kick in once you start hitting bumps in this car. So the 200 series, it set a very high bar for comfort, and particularly the way it's sort of managed to sort of mould its way over bumps. This one, you can feel that it has been stiffened up a tiny bit. So to get that control, to get that better drivability, there have been compromises to the ride quality. That said, it is still super quiet, very comfortable. It's still a car that's going to do big distances and eat them up with a lot of comfort. But as much as Land Cruisers are about country Ks and covering massive distances, often in very remote areas, they're also about doing serious off-road work, about getting over rocks, boulders, mud holes, all sorts of things like that. So let's give it a crack. A lot of the off-road basics aren't wildly different to the previous model. Ground clearance, for example, pretty similar, but things like the cutaway angle is much better because that rear bumper is sort of out of the way. There's a bit more space there for it to be able to go over ledges and rocks and so on without dragging its bum, basically. Most of the prototypes for this car, they came down under. They came here to be tested by a local team all over the place. One of the places they came to was exactly where I am now, the Australian Automotive Research Centre. It's down sort of near the Great Ocean Road in Victoria, but this car's also been to the outback. It's been across Australia, across a vast array of places, trying to put it through everything that Toyota thinks owners will drive these cars through. Toyota's done a lot of finessing with the electronics, for example. So in a 200 series, when you could hear the graunching, the grinding of things like traction control trying to stop wheel spin, this one, it's almost negligible. You can barely hear anything. So it's still got that immense capability. You can obviously power up some amazing hills, but it just does it a little bit easier. And things like the multi-terrain select system, for example, it's got a broader scope. It does more in terms of adjusting the steering, adjusting the brakes, adjusting the throttle calibration, but also you can now use it in high range. So 4H, whereas previously you had to pick 4 low, nowadays it operates across the spectrum. So there it is, a very exclusive sneak peek at just what it takes to bring a new Land Cruiser to market. There's a heck of a lot to it. But first impressions are very impressive. The car is going to be on sale in Australia late in 2021. Between now and then, there's still a fair bit of tuning and tweaking to be done. Now, for all those people who are concerned, worried that a V6 just isn't going to do the job of the V8, don't stress it. It is absolutely fine.